All right, it's 7:30. Welcome to all of you to the Monday, April 13th, 2020 meeting of the Falls Church City Council. We're delighted to have everyone with us. As you can tell, we are meeting virtually once again, all at our different locations. If I could, I'd like to call this meeting to order and ask folks to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to be leading the Pledge of Allegiance, although there's not a flag in this room. I'm going to stand up nonetheless and ask that you all recite the Pledge of Allegiance in your respective locations. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Yes, sir. Ms. Conley?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Mr. Z?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you. And thank you to all the folks who helped put this virtual meeting together. I think it's a lot more challenging than it may appear at first blush, but we hope that everyone's able to tune in and get information through this means. Once again, like we did last week, the public is welcome to go ahead and make email comments. The clerk will read the comments received to date after the city manager's report, which will be just in a few moments. And Ms. City Manager, would you like to give that email address once more for folks watching on television?
City clerk at fallschurchva.gov. City clerk at fallschurchva.gov. If you have comments, you can send those in.
All right. Again, you're welcome to send comments. We'd love to hear from you. If not, we can hear from you during the course of the week, and city staff and city council members will get back to you as soon as possible. Once again, our thanks to everyone, not only who's putting this meeting together, but all the great staff and police and fire, healthcare professionals, and this community as a whole for all the fine work they're doing to contain this pandemic here in Falls Church. I'm going to turn it over now to the city manager to give his report on the emergency. Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. For my report tonight, there are a couple of things I would like to touch on. When we met last week, I provided an overview and a status of city operations, and I reported out department by department how the city is remaining open and active even while our facilities are closed in order to comply with Governor Northam's Executive Order 55, which limits all public and private gatherings. It's not my intention to repeat that full report again tonight, although those activities that I noted a week ago remain ongoing. But I would like to take the time of the manager's report to emphasize the main message from last week, which is while our facilities are closed, the city government is open and is active and is providing services in every which way it can through this emergency. Almost all of the services that can be provided online and by phone are being provided, and that includes administering building permits, providing the whole range of police services in person, but also over the phone. The Treasurer and Commissioner are providing services. We're doing everything we can to keep the public informed through the daily briefing, which goes out electronically through our social media messaging and through the reporting by the media, including the Falls Church News Press. The Department of Public Works is moving projects forward, including transportation projects, the library project, and the capital improvements program. I'll also note that the Easter Bunny was active in the city over the weekend with a police escort, but the Easter Bunny went on tour since we couldn't have the Easter egg hunt this year at the Cherry Hill Farmhouse. The Easter Bunny went to the people, and I hope everybody enjoyed that. And it did get covered quite a bit by the media. One thing I want to speak to tonight during my report is how we are also looking ahead and trying to plan for the future as this public health emergency evolves. Our Office of Emergency Management, led by Joe Carter, is doing advanced planning for when the time comes for us to open facilities back up. And we don't think that this is imminent, and we will only open up in coordination with the health experts, Fairfax County Health Department, Virginia Department of Health, state and federal authorities. But we do anticipate that that day will come, and it will be a big challenge for us to maintain the health of our community when things start to open up. We've had briefings from the University of Virginia health experts and others in the region that do modeling of the spread of coronavirus. The current measures of social distancing are effective. They are working. And when we begin to open up, and when we do so prior to there being a vaccine or general antibodies or immunity within the community, the big concern obviously is a rapid increase of cases, hospitalization, use of intensive care units, and danger to our community. And so we know that testing and contact tracing is going to be an important component to keeping the community safe when we begin to open up. We also anticipate that the entire community is going to need to be involved in that, and that city employees specifically are going to need to be trained and learn how to do these procedures to protect both our workforce, but also the community and everyone that we come in contact in the course of our work. So that's looking ahead month or 2 months out as we anticipate that things will begin to open up. We're going to get a report tonight, again, to discuss the budget process. Kieran Bawa gave a presentation for the City Council of our initial look at revenues for the city government. And of course, like everywhere, we have a fiscal crisis that we're now dealing with. And it's going to require a lot of very difficult decisions in the coming months. But I raise that in the context of planning ahead in the sense that every jurisdiction, every nonprofit, every business is confronting the same difficulty. And I don't think any pandemic planning exercise or the health experts have ever anticipated that we will remain shut down for the full period of waiting for a vaccine. And that is why it's so important for us to develop the skills and the tools and the training so that we can begin to open up, but to do so safely and protect our community. So we're engaged in that work with our regional partners and trying to gather all the expertise so that we're prepared for that when that time comes. Cindy Mester will report on the upcoming General Assembly session. Later in this meeting, Kieran Bawa will again join the discussion where we talk about our budget schedule for 2021, and we want to have a conversation with council about that process. And we'll also hear tonight, when we get to the items that are on the agenda relating to the suspending of certain zoning regulations to help our business community provide their business services to the community without violating zoning regulations. So Jim Snyder and Becky Witzman will speak to that, but also report on other actions we're trying to do to assist our business community through the economic crisis that accompanies this health emergency. Also on the agenda tonight is an emergency ordinance to extend deadlines for real estate, meals, and hotel taxes, and I'll speak to those also in the context of how we're trying to help the community, including the business community, grapple with the economic dimensions of this crisis. With that report, if I could ask Cindy Mester now to speak to the work that we're doing to prepare for the upcoming General Assembly session. And so I'll turn it over to Ms. Mester.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. Yes, the General Assembly is due to reconvene April 22nd, and that would be the normal standard process to review any amendments from the governor related to legislation and/or the budget. This year, it will be much more complex due to the response to COVID-19, both in the physical location where General Assembly can meet, but also in terms of the state budget. There will be a lot of changes that the governor will propose in terms of reductions due to the economic revenue loss. And so we're monitoring that very closely, looking for the details when they're available. We have reached out on behalf of City Council to talk to our senator to make sure that our issues, our local issues, are aware, so that when the governor is dealing with the federal stimulus relief that will come through Richmond, as well as the local and state budgets, that we're communicating our needs and working collaboratively. So that request is in, and we'll be scheduling that in the near term. We're working closely to monitor amendments to the FY21 budget that the governor will propose. And of course, we're monitoring all the legislation that is being signed or coming out from the normal work of the General Assembly. Additionally, along with the state and regional partners, we continue to monitor the federal legislation and advocate for local resources for our citizens' business and the services we deliver from the government. Thank you, Mr. Shields.
So Mayor Tarter, that ends the city manager's report. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
I do have a question. It's Dan Z. And it was Mary Beth Conley actually that flagged this, and so she might actually have more information than I do. But like many times in the past where there's been a broad distribution of federal resources going out to states, counties, regions, and municipalities, it always excludes the smaller ones. So I recall during the Obama years that the stimulus excluded all cities less than 25,000 people. Of course, that just meant we had to fight twice as hard to try to get something going. And although we weren't successful, I would hate to see us take up this effort when most of the money is gone as opposed to the very beginning. Can you speak to that, Cindy?
Certainly. The federal stimulus money that's available to local governments for cities and towns and small counties will go to Richmond. So that's why working with the governor and the legislator is very critical. Only Fairfax County in the Commonwealth of Virginia will get that federal stimulus directly because it has a population of over 500,000. So your point's well taken. We need to make sure that the needs of small localities are known and aware at the state level. We also need to work very closely with the governor in the determination of how those funds will be distributed, because certain formulas are not beneficial to Northern Virginia localities or small localities. And one example would be the school funding if it goes through the local composite index. So that's something that we're working on very closely and monitoring as small localities and on behalf of the city.
Thank you.
And could I just note as well that the mayor, through the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, is in contact with our federal delegation, our congressional delegation, and we are making the case that local government, A, is the largest employer in the United States when you take education and all of the local government services together. But most importantly, our employees are public health employees, are emergency medical technicians, our fire. It is local government employees that are on the front lines of responding to this crisis, and it is appropriate for the federal government to provide assistance to local governments in performing that mission. There's been a step with the aid that has gone to the Commonwealth already, but it's not enough. And if every locality and every jurisdiction in America is in a fiscal crisis, that is probably the biggest problem that this country will have ultimately in managing this public health emergency. So we need help, and it is an appropriate investment by the federal government.
Have we lost audio for the mayor?
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, sorry about that. I was just saying, if I could, I was saying well said to Mr. Shields, and also just letting the public know that City Council, the city manager, assistant city manager, we have all been advocating on behalf of the city, and also our residents at these various levels of government to get as much assistance as possible. But it is a challenge. The aid to date has really mostly been directed to others. And so I think we're hopeful and certainly working very hard to get as much assistance as we can in localities, as are our neighbors as well. All right, so let's move on then, unless there are any other questions right at this moment. Why don't we move on to a summary of public comments? Madam Clerk, would you summarize the comments received to date?
Yes. We received the following public comment from John Regas of 301 West Broad Street. He wrote regarding construction vehicles speeding on Broad Street. John Tepperman provided some information about the use of delivery robots on the streets. And James Carney of 1132 South Washington Street asked for a moratorium on small cells and other wireless infrastructure permits during the COVID crisis.
All right, thank you very much. Unless there's any comments from council, why don't we move on to the items of business on the agenda?
I have one comment, Mr. Mayor.
Of course, Madam Vice Mayor.
There were two comments there about, I guess there's just one, but we've also gotten some other comments from citizens just about safety on the WNOD trail, sharing sidewalks between bikes and walkers and runners. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to do some kind of public information campaign to remind people to share and be polite, share the road, share the trail, share the sidewalks. It seems like there's been a bit of jostling there to make sure there's enough space. So that's one request. And the second one is related to the small cell wireless. Does the city have jurisdiction over that? Is that something we can respond to?
Let me take the two in order. First, your first point is well taken, and Susan Finarelli in our communications office is really trying to start messaging on civility in general. We got the letter about the speeding construction vehicles, and we've gotten several of those that have come in through various different channels. And so we do want to message out that people do need to take this time to be safe, but also treat each other gently. And that goes on the WNOD as well. The WNOD is currently as crowded as it's ever been, which is a wonderful thing. But that mix of hardcore speed cyclists and families out there with pets and kids and toddlers, everyone needs to just slow down, relax, and enjoy the trail and not set speed records. So we want to try to help with that messaging. With respect to the small cell we are in the position of having been preempted both by the FCC and by the Virginia General Assembly, and very limited in how we can regulate these permits. We have tried to exercise every bit of the authority that's given to us on that, and we have not actually had a whole lot of applications yet at this point. I think largely because that technology still has a long ways to go before it will be effective, based on the information we've received. Others might have better information, but that's our understanding. But the fact is, we have not gotten yet a lot of applications for these small cells. But I think that's probably something we should schedule at some point for a council discussion, because this question is going to come up probably more frequently as that technology does advance.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
I've got a question. A comment that was passed along.
Before you ask that question, I do want to let the public know an important piece of information. It is Mr. Lichtenhouse's birthday in 2 days, so wish him the best of birthdays on the 15th. So happy birthday to you. Go ahead, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
A comment that was passed along to me by a neighbor just a couple hours ago. Can someone elaborate on the communication that was recently issued related to compost and yard waste pickup? There was a question as to whether or not the bundled sticks would be picked up or included.
The message was to we are picking them up, but we also are noting the fact that with people staying home, there's been a lot of wonderful spring cleaning going on, and our solid waste system, just as a whole, is overtaxed, and so we've joined the region in asking people to kind of flatten the curve, help us flatten the curve just a little bit on our solid waste. Okay. So we will pick it up when it's placed on the curb, but we're asking people to just be mindful of that.
Got it. I'll pass that along. Thank you, Mr. City Manager.
Along those lines, if I could also ask, I understand that special pickups have been delayed or canceled for the next several weeks. Is that accurate, Mr. Shields?
Let me get back with you on that and confirm that. And actually, I can probably over the course of this meeting, we'll get that confirmation.
All right. Any other comments, questions for Mr. Shields or Ms. Messner before we get started?
I had one, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
While we were talking about pedestrian safety, I actually just had some positive feedback. I've heard thanks from a lot of citizens about some new sidewalks and crosswalks that were installed. I think specifically at Spring and Poplar and Timber and Jackson. And I personally experienced the new PED lights at Great Falls and Lincoln. So very much appreciate work from Public Works continuing through this crisis as well. So especially people are using sidewalks and crosswalks more than ever right now.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions or comments for the city manager? All right. Let's move on to business on the agenda. Madam Clerk, will you call the first item?
Yes, I believe we're calling two items together. They are requests for easements that have to do with the George Mason High School project, and they will be called together, and then you will have an opportunity to make a motion for each of them. So the first one is TR 20-13, resolution to approve an easement for Dominion Energy Virginia parallel to Leesburg Pike to serve the new George Mason High School and West End campus development, and to authorize the city manager to execute the deed. And the second is TR 20-14, resolution to approve an easement for Verizon Virginia parallel to Leesburg Pike to serve the new George Mason High School and West End campus development, and to authorize the city manager to execute the deed.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Shields?
I'm going to take on this one, I believe.
Okay.
And if Ms. Mester, if you could tee up the slides, that would be helpful.
Doing so.
Okay. So the reason we're talking about these two easements together is because they are actually two easements over the same property. This first slide that you can see shows the overall duct bank plan for the West End. And you can see the red and orange lines that go all around the site. that show where duct banks will be placed to provide utility services for the site, primarily for the high school and for the development. And the vast majority of this area, or this duct bank, is located on the school's property, and they will be granting easements to Dominion Electric Virginia and others over their property. However, as you can see, the easement area for action tonight is just along that southern edge of Parcel D, just north of Leesburg Pike. So it's that one line that goes along the bottom edge of the drawing. And the two different requests is one for Dominion Electric Virginia and one for Verizon to put their facilities in that location. On the Verizon easement plat, it's turned 1/4 turn to the left, so that the easement along Leesburg Pike is the shaded area that shows on the left-hand side of the drawing. There is also, if you look along the bottom to the right, along Haycock Road, there's a tiny little square that's a Verizon easement. And what that is for just a small area, part of which is on the city's property, most of which is on the school board property, but it's for one of those handheld doors in the ground that can be used to access the underground wires. And these easements are all only underground, and the poles and wires that exist there or have existed there are being undergrounded as part of this work that was funded with VDOT grant money. The city had, so here's a picture of the Dominion easement, and this is now, the picture is turned back again. You can see where it's highlighted. And the easement area is where the yellow highlighting shows. It's a little dashed line with a box. Both the easements are over the same area. They're about 15 feet wide, and I think they're about 300 feet long. The work on these facilities to date has been done by EYA, part of our partners. They were selected as a sole practicable source so that they could coordinate this work with what they plan to do for the development. So the easements that are located here will eventually become part of the ground leased property that goes to the developer, and they are ensuring, as doing the work themselves and with their utilities consultant, they're ensuring that this work will be consistent with the project they have proposed and that they will move forward with. The easements currently are scheduled to be 40 years long, which is what the city can grant. And as I said, they'll both be over the same property. The reason that these are being scheduled for an emergency meeting is because if they are not granted now, Dominion and Verizon will not be able to offer their the facilities sufficient to construct and finish the new high school. And so if they are not approved at this time and granted by the city, there will be irrevocable harm to our project. And therefore, we're asking that you approve them on this at this emergency meeting. I think that's everything that I have. If you have any questions, please let me know. You would be authorizing the city manager to sign the deeds of easement.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Shields, do you have anything to add?
No, I do not, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, how about questions from council? Are there any questions or comments from council?
Question from Dave Snyder. So the original grant, which several of us worked really hard to bring about, was about, if I recall, $15 million. How much is left in that grant to work on the actual intersection? And can I have a financial accounting of the expenditures of money under that grant so far? Number one, and number two, are these expenses eligible expenses?
Councilmember Schneider, I'd be happy to answer those questions. The NVTA is provided the grant, and that occurred with your assistance and a lot of community support for it. With that grant application, there was a budget, and this undergrounding work was part of that budget. And we provide a monthly report to the NVTA along with our draws on the grant. So if I could get the latest financial report to you, part of that regular process, and I'll share that with you and the full City Council.
Great. I just wanted some of that on the record so folks knew that there is financial oversight. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments from council? I have a couple. Hang on, it looks like my video just stopped. Can you guys see me here?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a couple questions, if I could. One, are we coordinating with Virginia Tech? Are they going to ultimately tie their utilities into these lines?
So the answer is yes, we are coordinating with them. So they are aware of all the infrastructure work that we've done. They have not indicated that they're sufficiently far enough along in their planning to be able to say, explicitly, we need to be able to tie in here at this point or that point. We do have junction boxes, which is maybe not exactly the right point, but service access points in this duct bank in the future if others needed to have arrangements with Verizon, Dominion, Cox for access to that duct bank. And so I think that opportunity will be there for them in the future, but they just haven't been far enough in their planning to say exactly how they would access this infrastructure.
I would go ahead and offer up this plat and some of your materials to them so that they can use it in their own planning to be neighborly. I have a couple other questions. One, is there provision in these easements that they're relocatable in the event that a development goes a different place and the lines need to be moved? Is there any provision, Madam City Attorney, about relocation of these easements?
There is a provision. However, I believe that that some of that would be done at the city's cost, or we would provide a reasonable replacement easement. It's expected at this time, however, that the developer has determined where these easements can go. This area is expected to be under the streetscape. They have set the width of these easements so that it will not interfere with where they plan to put their development.
Got it, but things change, and so I would just make sure there's that provision in each of the easements, whether it's at our expense or whoever's expense. I think just the right to relocate is important. Secondly or thirdly, are there above grade boxes, switch boxes and the like, or is everything above grade with respect to these lines, below grade?
I believe everything is below grade. That anything that has to be above grade is not certainly in a city easement, because these easements are only for underground facilities.
So that the language of the easement specifically states that they don't convey any rights to above grade
Correct.
use. Okay, because that's good. We don't really want boxes all over the place, and I'm sure it's easier for them. And all of this is under sidewalk or streetscape, is that right?
That's correct. That's the EYA, together with their utilities consultant who has been managing this project, has assured us of that.
Okay. And then also, I would just suggest that EYA formally sign off on this, even though it's maybe at their request, just for give some consideration as to the CA, our agreement.
Yes.
To make sure that they formally sign off on any changes to title, because this would be a change to title.
Yes. And we have already requested that they provide us those assurances.
Okay.
That this will be consistent with what's in the comprehensive agreement.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments, or do we have a motion?
Mayor, could I just make one point? there are some above grade cabinets and switches that are on the school property. They're not part of these easements, but I just didn't want that to. I just wanted to note that is a fact. We've tried to prevent it to the best extent possible, but there are some spots on the school property where there will be some cabinets above grade.
And the schools are aware of that, I presume, and are okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TR 20-13.
All right, and do we have a second?
Second.
And who's the second?
Ms. Connolly?
All right, so Mr. Duncan and then Ms. Connolly is the second. I know that the public is unlikely to comment on this, but we have kept this matter open to the public. Are there any comments from the public, Madam Clerk?
I have not received any.
Okay. All right, so we do have a motion that's been seconded. Will you call the vote on this, Madam Clerk?
Yes. Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Yeah.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Thank you, council. Motion carries 7-0.
All right, do we have a motion on the second related item?
Make a motion. Motion to approve. -2014.
All right, do we have a second? Who's the second?
It's Ms. Hardy.
All right, Ms. Hardy on the second. Mr. Lichtenhouse made the motion. Again, I'm just going to ask if there are any public comment through electronic means, Madam Clerk.
I am checking and no further comment.
All right, so let's go ahead and move to the vote then.
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes,
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, council.
thank you. Will you call the next item, please?
Yes, we have TO 20-14, emergency ordinance to provide business relief during the COVID-19 pandemic to extend the due date of the second installment of the 2020 real estate tax from June 5, 2020 to July 6, 2020, and to temporarily suspend payments of meals and transient occupancy tax.
Mayor Tarter, I'll give an initial staff report on this item, but I do want to note just at the outset that a number of people have worked on this. First, the city attorney has been involved in this from the beginning, but Becky Witzman and her work with the Chamber of Commerce and her really constant outreach and communication with the business community is where some of the ideas for this ordinance came from. And Kiran Bawa has worked through in terms of the fiscal analysis of this. And then, of course, the treasurer, Jody Acosta, and the commissioner of revenue, Tom Clinton, have been active from the beginning, just on the policy questions, but also on the practicalities of what's before the council. So let me just enumerate what is proposed here. First is a 31-day extension for the real estate property tax payment, which would normally be due on June 5th, 2020, to extend that to July 6th, 2020. And so that is a change to Falls Church City Code 40-283. The second is a 61-day extension for applications to be considered for tax relief for seniors and people with disabilities from the normal due date of April 15th for those applications, to extend that to June 15th, 2020. That is covered in Falls Church City Code 40-135. And then the third item is a temporary suspension of payments for monthly meals and transient occupancy tax, aka the hotel tax, until June 1st, 2020. at which time payment of all such taxes collected during the period of the suspension shall be paid. And that relates to Falls Church Code 40-185 and 40-230. These are all intended just to provide the community and the business community in particular with additional time. Some of that is needed simply because of the fact that people in this crisis might have lost access to their bookkeeper or their accountant, or might not have access to their office to access the financial records they need to do these filings. And it does come about from a review of what's happening in the region. These provisions are very similar to provisions that are being carried out in Northern Virginia and probably across the Commonwealth of Virginia. One thing I will note that with respect to the meals and transient occupancy tax, those are taxes that are paid by customers. They're what is called a trust tax, in which the business entity collects the tax, typically holds that in a separate account or in a segregated fund, and then conveys that to the city, and the city pays a small fee to the business for collecting that tax on behalf of the city. And it is really important as a matter of principle and as a matter of law that those funds not be commingled. But what this relief is really intended to do is simply just to give the business community a bit of time to deal with the emergency, to deal with all the things that they're handling right now in this crisis, and then payments will be made on June 1st. Kiran Bawa has also been active in this just to understand what the impact is to the city's finances, and we'll talk more about that on tonight's meeting. But the intent here really is that this is a deferral, and that the payments ultimately will be made and be counted in this fiscal year. And so we don't anticipate, other than an impact on cash flow, we don't think it would be something that would have an impact on the city's end of year financial reporting, which we have to report out to the rating agencies and to other authorities. So that's the staff report. Again, Becky Witzman is available to answer any questions, Kiran Bawa or Carol McCoskry, and others who have been active in this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manager. Are there any questions or comments regarding these matters?
I have some questions.
Sure. So if there are more than one question, why don't we start on the front end of the alphabet and work our way down just for convenience. Let's start maybe with Ms. Conley. Is there any questions you have, Ms. Conley? I don't feel compelled anyone to ask any questions. I'm sure there'll be plenty. Ms. Conley?
Just a quick question. Mr. Shields just mentioned these taxes it's going to span 2 fiscal years. And you mentioned that's not really going to have that much of an impact. Is there any can people pay early if they want to? Can they pay on time? Would that then remain in the current fiscal year and then everything else go to the next fiscal year? Can you just?
Yes, people can pay on time. And in fact, for property taxes, for the real estate measures, those are typically paid by your mortgage company out of your escrow payments. So the majority of the payments for homeowners will be made on time in any event. So that's really is geared probably principally to the business community or for those who don't have a mortgage. One other clarification, I may have misspoken, but the intent is that actually all of these funds will be counted, even though there is a deferral, they will all be counted in the current fiscal year. So we're hoping that we actually won't have to split it over 2 fiscal years, because as a tax, that the money will actually be encumbered or be an account payable in the current fiscal year.
Thank you.
Really?
Okay, Mr. Duncan, did you have anything?
That's interesting. So even though the money doesn't come into hand until after June 30th, we can count it as part of the fiscal year as if it came in June. Is that?
That is correct. And I can defer to Ms. Bawa if she wants to speak to that in a little bit more detail?
Sure. So we close the year, the fiscal year closes June 30th. However, the collections recognized till end of August book towards the fiscal year, any receivables that we get through the end of August. We're talking about a 31-day delay from June 5th to July 6th. Our cash flow allows us only that kind of a window, and beyond which we gear more towards collections. We get a big chunk of the real estate taxes right at the deadline, and then there are some collections that we go after.
Okay, understood. My second question, so on the TOT and the meals tax, basically we're giving an extension for the April and May taxes in both those areas, or a suspension or whatever. Would the May meals tax normally be due, would be paid, immediately on June 1st, or would it not come in typically like 2 or 3 weeks later?
So if I may answer, the month's meals taxes are due on the 20th of the following month. So this applies to the March and April payments, or for any of the others who have not paid the February. Those are all due on June 1st. The May payment would be due on June 20th.
Okay, so it's March and April that are due June 1st. The May payment would be due June 20th, as would be normal. Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. I think one of my questions was answered. I wanted to clarify that the property tax extension is both for commercial and residential homeowners. I think we were mainly talking about businesses at the beginning, but I wanted to clarify that it's for residential as well.
That is correct. It's for every real estate taxpayer.
Great. I think in general, I support these, especially having read the comments from Ms. Witzman and the Chamber of Commerce from the businesses. I think it seems like this would help them a lot. One thing I would just note is for the property tax extension, I think some of the landlords have noted this already, but I think it'd be great for us to encourage that if we are allowing this 31-day extension, that they in turn pass that on to their tenants. I think especially since rent is one of businesses' largest expenses, I think it's important for people to know to pay it forward and to keep as many of those small businesses in business on the other side of this as possible. I think I've noted a couple of landlords are doing this already, but I think hopefully this can help them do that more. That's it.
Thank you. Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yeah, thanks. Ms. Hardy touched on one of the things that I've felt is very important. I've been supportive of offering these types of deferrals as long as it doesn't create some fiscal strain. So it's great to know that staff has figured out a way to at least give us some breathing room that we can extend to the businesses. I would echo Ms. Hardy's comments. I think it is absolutely imperative that even though we can't legally compel commercial and residential landlords to extend this same type of relief to their tenants, I think it's important that Becky and Jim and others, and I'm sure that the Chamber of Commerce would be willing to make these calls as well. One, to message this, but also to implore them to pass along this time frame of deferral to their tenants. If we're providing that relief, they should also be willing to provide comparable relief to those tenants as well. And I think that that's something that we need to press very hard. We're obviously all in this together. And if we can find the ability to give commercial landlords some breathing room, they should be willing to extend that as well. Because the truth of the matter is, as you said, Mr. Shields, this tax deferral is not really going to impact most folks on the residential side, as those taxes are escrowed. And so this is really, really geared towards doing whatever we can to help the businesses in a fiscally responsible way. And this is a great way to do it as long as the commercial landlords hold up their end of the bargain. One other question that I had, the business tangible filings that are due on May 1st, is that deadline going to be extended if we're talking about kind of relieving the administrative burden?
So I had a discussion with the Commissioner of Revenue on that point after our conversation, Mr. Lichtenhouse, and the mailing had already gone out for those. Yep. So we did not include that in this ordinance, but a couple things to note. This filing is due in May, as you note. The actual payment of funds is not due until the fall. And if any business has a difficulty with accessing their records to complete this filing, they can contact the Commissioner of Revenue and just talk through in terms of the timeline for getting that information in. That is an administrative deadline.
Yep.
And so he'd be happy to discuss any needs the business community has on that front.
Good. That's great. I know Tom's always been responsive for folks that have had some trouble. So I think that's important to get that message out as well, because I've had to fill those out myself, and it's could be quite painful if you don't have enough staff to help out to answer those questions. And then just a general question. I think you guys have noted this, but I just think it's important to emphasize this. But this plan that you guys are recommending, Kieran, Wyatt, this does not place a significant fiscal strain on the city. We can still meet our own obligations. And this is not going to put us in a cash crunch or squeeze. Is that correct?
That is correct. And let me also ask Ms. Bawa if she'd like to respond to that question.
That is correct. The city's cash flow allows for this 31-day extension.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you guys for working hard to be able to do what we can. I personally appreciate it. I know everyone else does as well. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Snyder.
Thanks. I generally support this. My questions about any financial downsides for the city have been answered. That so far as we know, there aren't any financial downsides. So I'm satisfied to move forward. Thank you.
Mr. Z, anything?
I just have something along the lines of what Mr. Schneider just mentioned. I'm glad we're taking positive steps to address doing what we can for those in the city. Of course, it's incumbent upon us to do all that we can to ensure that these businesses endure. I'm not sure how to ask the question, but to the extent that these are trust funds, and someone perhaps under duress borrows against them or otherwise utilizes them. I guess my general question is how much default is there that we can stand before it puts us in a difficult position? We've done the risk analysis on this. Are we talking about a large number, or are we talking about a small number?
That's a difficult thing to model. We will try to, when we have publicity about this action, assuming the council does take this action tonight, to try to make clear, the status of these trust taxes, to try to help avoid that type of a situation. But we have not attempted to model the default rates as a result of this ordinance.
Well, I understand that, and I think it's wise to at least know what it is for our own benefit, and certainly for yours and for CFO. So I do support this. As I said, I'm glad that we're moving out and doing what we can to help out where we can. But if things get to a point where people feel compelled to avail themselves of this resource as a bridge loan or some other kind of mechanism, well, we need to have recourses as well. So I think that you need to message this correctly, and that yes, we are doing everything that we can, but also be wise about how we apply this. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Z. Just for clarification on Mr. Z's last comments. So, Mr. Shields, just to be crystal clear with the public, these are not intended to be bridge loans. These delays or deferrals in payments are not meant to be in any way a loan or any kind of float for these businesses. It's merely to allow them logistically to get their bookkeepers, their records, and the like set. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Madam Clerk, are there any comments that have come in during this meeting that relate to this matter?
No, sir.
Okay. Do we have a motion regarding this item?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt. It is not 20-14 because we just did that, right? Doesn't this need to have a new number?
TR 20-14. But this is TO.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Move to adopt TO 20-14 on an emergency basis. Grant first reading to that ordinance, schedule a public hearing and second reading to be scheduled before May 31st, 2020, and authorize advertisement of the same according to law when meeting date has been determined.
All right, thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Snyder is the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mr. Z,
Yes.
and Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Council.
All right, will you call the next item, please?
Yes, we have TO 20-15, emergency ordinance to suspend enforcement of zoning regulations that limit outdoor conduct of business and placement of temporary signs in order to grant temporary relief from conditions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you. Mr. Shields?
And Mayor Tarter, Jim Snyder will give the staff report for this item.
All right, Mr. Snyder, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Trying to see if you can see me here. This is an emergency ordinance to suspend enforcement of zoning regulations that provide limits presently for outdoor conduct of business and placement of temporary signs. And this is in response to the COVID pandemic that we are presently experiencing. The recommendation is to adopt this ordinance on an emergency basis, which will last for 60 days, and schedule a second reading and public hearing prior to May 31st of this year. This is basically in response to providing the flexibility to provide better health, safety, and welfare for people who no longer should be in business establishments so that they can continue to operate their business safely outside. I'm sure you've seen, there are numerous examples of where people are doing pickup and drop off. And this ordinance would allow the banners and the outdoor activities, the drive up, carry out style of activity, provide more flexibility for signs on the establishment, sandwich signs as well, and allow that ordering to be done in the vicinity of the facility or its parking lot as an accessory use. Also, parking spaces that are part of that occupant's property or usage can be converted to outdoor seating or tents or other carry-out uses. Basically, this is designed to help businesses survive and conduct these outdoor activities. We recommend it be adopted tonight. It will be effective for 60 days, and then there would be a second reading for the ordinance itself, which would have to be scheduled before May 31st. Becky Witzman and I and others have been working on a number of things with businesses, and she has a more detailed report of some of those activities. This ordinance adoption would make legal some of the things that are being done presently out in the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Ms. Witzman scheduled to speak right now, or would that be at a later time?
I think if you adopt the ordinance now, she has a presentation or their PowerPoint that does describe some of the activities that are going on in the community that we've been working on.
And are we to hear that now, or would that be at a later point?
I think you can do that later. You can adopt this ordinance now, but I think the other piece is informational and will be interesting to the public and businesses.
All right, thank you. So let's open it up to questions. And again, I'll go in alphabetical order. Don't feel compelled to ask a question. If you do, though, I'm going to go through our list of city council members. Ms. Vice Mayor Connolly, did you have any questions or comments?
I just one question about the enactment of this. If we're not going to do second reading until a date not yet certain, I'm assuming some of these things are already taking place. Will there be limits on those things right now, or are we just going to assume that once we adopt the first reading, second reading will follow?
This would be effective immediately and would last for 60 days. And so the point being that you can then adopt it formally prior to May 31st and extend it. This could go much like your emergency legislation recently about how you conduct your meetings. So this would take place immediately. It's good for 60 days. We would have something specific about this at a meeting prior to the 31st of May.
It's an emergency ordinance effective right away. And then you also have to re-adopt it within 60 days under the standard procedures for it to go beyond the 60 days. So that's why today you adopt the emergency ordinance that's effective immediately. And then you're also giving first reading, and then we'll follow on with second reading.
So just like we did with the emergency ordinance in the first place.
Correct. We just doing it a little more efficiently this time by doing them in one staff report.
Got it.
Page 4 has the actual language, which provides the relief for the conduct of business outdoors, and then the specifics about signing and taking and placing orders and flexibility on parking.
All right, Mr. Duncan, do you have any questions?
No, thanks.
Okay, Ms. Hardy?
I do. So thank you. I wholeheartedly support these. I think for something that clearly doesn't cost us much money and could help businesses, I think they make a lot of sense. One, I think in previous conversations, we talked about creating additional kind of pickup areas or pickup zones. So where we could convert parking spaces or potentially even a lane of certain streets. Is that something that staff has given more thought to add on to this?
Presently, the way it's designed, parking spaces that are available could be converted to that. That's part of the ordinance. Also, we have a number of businesses now that have some frontage on Broad Street, and you've got informal usage of that presently on Broad Street, West Broad, where people are stopping and picking up. There are presently parking restrictions on West Broad. So we just have to, with a lesser amount of traffic, it's a good bit safer than it used to be. So one of the questions
slow those construction vehicles down from speeding down Broad Street.
So one question is, do we want to put some kind of a caution sign that just lets people know that, you may have pick up and drop off in that right lane. Other businesses have parking spaces or parking lots, so they are not as affected. But particularly between Washington Street and Little Falls, we do have a lot of storefronts directly on West Broad Street, and quite a number of restaurants and other businesses there that could take advantage of, and I think presently are taking advantage of some of that frontage on Broad Street.
Yeah, so if the businesses support it and it enables them to do more business and get more Uber Eats and Grubhub drivers there, I'd support experimenting with that. My second question I think is probably more for later. So when, per Mr. Shields' comment at the beginning, if and when we're ready to open things back up, I think an extension of this zoning relaxing could be promoting more outdoor dining. So giving people more space and room beyond what we traditionally do. And I think I've seen some language on that from other jurisdictions. So I'd like for us to keep that in mind when the time comes, is to promote more outdoor dining, especially as warmer weather hits and we can promote more social distancing and create more economic activity at the same time.
And I think the last part of the ordinance proposed, number 3 on lines 33 through 35, does get at that flexibility for outdoor seating when and if it's more available.
And then one comment on the legal part of it. So I think it notes that, all the signs are allowed provided there's no vision or safety obstructions. I also wanted to make sure that ADA was considered, Carol. So no sandwich boards would reduce the sidewalk width beyond what's required, for example. Is that covered in that language?
Let me just look at it real quick. I can't see
that
it.
Certainly was the intent.
I think it would be a safety hazard if it's limited to sidewalk.
It's line 23, I think, in the staff report, and I just wanted to make sure the ADA was covered so people didn't think they could take up all of the sidewalk to put their sandwich boards in.
No, they need to keep them open.
But that was it. Thank you. I support this.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yeah, I support it. Appreciate you guys doing this. From a tactical perspective, because I know a number of us have received comments and questions from businesses related to this. Who do we direct that to? I mean, if we're looking to move quickly to be able to answer questions and move on the fly, does that come to you, Wyatt, or does that go to Jim and Becky? Who do we direct people to?
Becky and myself and the chamber have been, fielding questions from and doing a lot of outreach, frankly, with the business community. So I think that would continue.
Okay. Okay. I'd also seen a late comment come in from a business owner here in town who had asked about converting some of the handicap spots that are in front of businesses to allow for folks to stop in and pick up if those aren't being used for regular parking like they would normally be used. Is that part of this intent to evaluate that type of thing as well?
I can't comment specifically on the handicap spaces.
I don't know if it's necessary.
I think there certainly is a lot of usage of spaces in general. We have a lot of vacant parking lots at this moment.
Those just happen to be the closest ones, in some cases the most convenient for people to run in.
It would be nice to have a parking problem now. We just don't seem to have one presently.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Snyder.
This is a good ordinance that will help our businesses maintain and thrive under challenging circumstances. So thank you.
Mr. Z.
Yes. I think that businesses are taking matters in their own hands, and that's to be applauded, frankly. To take an ordinance to catch up to where they are, that's good. I've heard that we can reevaluate this and see whether there are additional things to be added or modified. And I think that's included here as well in the flexibility clause. So I fully support this. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I do. I support this as well. These are really difficult times for our restaurants and small businesses, and we really need to do all we can. I think the idea of putting out the sign, I don't know what the thing's called, the mobile sign on Broad Street, where I have seen cars stacked up to do takeout, but maybe with some kind of lighting that just says support local restaurants or something like that, that will get people to, because the cars are parked in the travel lanes, that would let people know there's an obstruction coming up, but it'd also be a sign to maybe ask people to support local businesses or local restaurants. So I would support the use of that flashing sign. If we have more than one, maybe one on each side of the street, some kind of notation like that. I also think it'd be good to get this information out very soon to the businesses, whether that's through Jim or through our Chamber of Commerce or Becky or whatever, but I think they ought to be given the word very quickly in an effective way. And I think we all would welcome more ideas about how we can work with our businesses, either through the chamber itself or other means, so that we can come up with more ideas like this. But I am very supportive of this measure. Madam Clerk, are there any comments that have come in from the public about this particular item?
Let me check one more time. No, sir, no comments.
All right, why don't you give the city's the email address one more time in case people do want to comment as this meeting goes on.
Right, and this is for any time at all during the week between meetings. You can always send comments for City Council to cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov, and we will make sure the council sees all of your comments.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have a motion regarding this matter?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TO 20-15 on an emergency basis and grant first reading to that ordinance, schedule a public hearing and second reading for a meeting to be scheduled before May 31, 2020, and authorize advertisement of the same according to law when meeting date has been determined.
Second, Dan Z.
All right, Dan Z on the second. Madam Clerk.
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
And Mayor Charter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Will you call the next item, please?
I believe we have a discussion on budget schedule changes.
All right, thank you. Mr. Shields, are you handling this, or is this going to Ms. Bawa?
So I'll say a few introductory things, and then Ms. Bawa will provide a verbal update to her report last week on the financial condition of the city in light of the restrictions in place with respect to the COVID response. We have a slide, Cindy, I don't know if you can put it up, but one of the things we wanted to discuss with the council is the schedule for considering next year's budget, FY 2021. And we have a fairly simple plan, and that would be to work towards a briefing and a presentation by the staff for April 27th, and a first reading on a budget ordinance at that meeting. We would have a public hearing on May 11th and a work session discussion on the budget proposals. And then on May 26th, a council meeting, a second public hearing, and final consideration. So a couple of notes on this schedule and kind of the premise behind it. One, as a matter of reality, we have less time than we'd like to get good data and really work through a comprehensive set of budget recommendations in light of that data. We also have no idea as to whether there's going to be a strong bounce back to the economy like some forecast, or a very long, slow recovery, or the deepest recession since the Great Depression. The forecasts are all over the map. So the approach that we would take is to provide a very slim budget document that would start from 2020 as the starting point. Then we add in the mandatory cost increase, which we don't have control over, and then we subtract out the cost reductions that we need to take in order to balance the budget based on the best forecasts that we can come up with, again, without much data, but really just with our best read on what the situation is. So don't expect the big budget book, but instead probably a 6-page or less memo laying out where those reductions would come. We would also characterize this as, yes, we'd be asking council to adopt a full annual budget, including the school transfer amount. But we would also just recognize that this is a highly volatile and fluid situation, and that we would give constant financial reports to the council, and most likely in the September-October timeframe, we'd come back together formally to see, is the situation improving? Is it worse? How has the situation changed based on what we know today? And we can make adjustments. So that's a kind of a skeleton description of the process that we would envision. And now let me turn it over to Ms. Bawa just for an update on discussions we've been having over the past week about the numbers that we're working with for FY 2021. I think the main message from Ms. Bawa's presentation is this is serious. This is going to require really hard decisions, and we're really just now kind of coming to terms with it. But over the next month and a half, we're going to have to wrestle with some pretty difficult budget decisions. As Cindy Mester noted at the beginning of this meeting, we are reaching out to the General Assembly and to our delegation to see what assistance will come, and that could change the picture for us. We need it to. But I think for our immediate budgeting, unless something changes really quickly, we need to make some very hard and very tough decisions to protect the city's, basically just to adapt to a very changing revenue situation. Ms. Bawa, if I could turn it over to you for just a verbal update. We don't have an updated presentation, but maybe just a verbal presentation of the numbers we're looking at. And Ms. Bawa, you might be on mute. We can't hear you speaking.
Due apologies. Sorry, that's correct. So as part of the last Monday's financial update presentation, we provided two scenarios to council, a moderate and a worst scenario. Moderate scenario with a revenue shortfall along with mandated increase comes to a total net shortfall of 2.35 million to a worst scenario of 5.45 million shortfall. We propose in the coming weeks, 2 weeks, on the 27th, we will bring to council a memo with a moderate situation with the anticipation that the 3 or 4 months of this fiscal year are going to be similar, and hopefully there will be a recovery after that. And this will require elimination of a lot of programs to bridge this gap. And just to remind everyone, this elimination, the shortfall is compared to the fiscal year 20 budget. So 2.5, roughly 2.4 to 5.4 million reduction in between those two scenarios coming for next year. This will require freezes. It would require freezing positions for a good portion of the year. It would require us to have to freeze many of our capital spending, the pay-as-you-go fundings, and scenarios on how we want to take all the refunds that we're doing for the parks programs for a portion of the year. So we will bring details about all this. Needless for me to reiterate what Mr. Shields just said. This is a serious situation for us. We are dealing with a big shortfall, revenue shortfall that we need to address as part of our expenditures. And we will bring for you a memorandum and with an ordinance for the budget, CIP, and tax rate ordinance along with that, with all the proposed reductions to address as balancing measures to address that revenue shortfall as part of a balanced budget requirement by the city's charter.
Thank you very much. Is that the end of your presentation, Ms. Palwa?
Yes, Mayor Tarver.
Right.
Yes.
All right. So let's open it up to questions or comments. And I'm going to go ahead and start alphabetically with Vice Mayor Conley. Ms. Conley, do you have any questions or comments?
I do not.
Okay. Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So initially, we were going to vote on the budget in the first meeting in June, I think June 8th. So you've decided to move that back. I just wondered what the thinking was that went into that, and maybe related to that is what are our other neighboring jurisdictions doing in terms of their calendars?
So there were two reasons for moving it back a week. One is there are some practical considerations with respect to the school administration. The sooner they have a number, the better, because they need to make decisions with respect to their contracts with teachers. Typically, that happens in May. So a June date did put them in some difficulty. Then the other piece of information is we did sort of see the roundtable of what the region is doing, and most are adopting sooner rather than later. And not that that's determinative. Really, the first reason is the more serious one.
Okay, but is it your professional opinion, both of y'all, that we're not going to know? We would not know that much more on June the 8th than we would know on May the whatever the date was you said. So
if I may add to that, Mr. Duncan, initially we were hoping we would have the March payments that come by April 20th. Since we are extending those deadlines, we are not going to expect a whole lot of real data. So having extra 2 weeks is going to be same projections, working around the same projections. Also, jurisdictions around are having similar timelines. They are either in the process of adopting, working through the deliberations, and hope to adopt by the end of this month or mid-May. And with the same understanding that once we have some sort of stabilization or control over the situation and the revenues, some sort of a trend that we all have, we will come back to council in fall with a revision for the budget, hopefully on the positive side, but it could be any direction.
Okay, just one other thought. I mean, I hear what you're saying. It makes sense. Certainly, we don't want schools to be disadvantaged in decisions they need to make. So if going a couple of weeks earlier helps them and does not disadvantage us, that's good. The kind of vagueness about when we would come back to the budget is the only thing that makes me a little uncomfortable. I mean, the good thing about the budget process as we know it is that it's very rigid. It's got, timelines and town halls, and everybody kind of knows what to expect. And I've seen in the media, some other jurisdictions are handling it this way. And as it relates to our status in meeting as an emergency entity, I don't know, at some point in the fall, I would hope that we would be able to get back into a kind of normal council meeting routine where every meeting we could do a little touching base on budget issues rather than, kind of, oh my gosh, we're going to have a big, set to on the budget at some date to be named later. So, I don't have any objections to what you're raising, but I would like us to go into it with the notion that we would have, a little firmer idea of when we might actually take the next look at the budget and factor in, things like construction as it kept going and real estate sales. Are they as robust as they typically have been? How are the restaurants doing? The various indicators that usually we get, and are interested in. This time we're going to be especially wanting to get them and especially interested in what they show.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. Ms. Bawa, I just wanted to clarify the numbers, first of all, because I was looking through my notes from last week. So as I recall from the discussion last week, for FY20, we think that largely with the hiring freeze and non-essential spending stopping, we can cover the shortfall. In FY21, we are expecting a shortfall of 1.3 to 4.4 million compared to the FY20 budget. And then tonight, I think I heard you say 2.3 to 5.4.
That's correct. So those numbers are only the revenue projections that were the low, and then we are adding the mandated increases that are required by various subsidy and the contract increases that must be addressed. So overall, the increases are 2.4 to 5.4.
2.4 to 5.4. And so you'll present kind of a budget with
yes.
both of those scenarios?
We will bring, as of now, the moderate scenario. And within that, there could be a couple of options, but the worst scenario, I think we will address only between now and then if certain indication comes to that. Otherwise not.
Okay, so just one question I'll ask that I've been asked a few times now is just in February, we had approved kind of a surplus of $4.6 million. Is it too late for us to think about pulling any of those things back? Have we spent all 4.6 million, or is that something that we can think about pulling in to the FY21 shortfall discussions?
So as part of addressing this deficit, we are looking at those funds, and I would look at them as one-time money. And a good portion of those should be used to address the fiscal year 20 revenue shortfall, and if required, they will be part of the discussion for 2020.
Ms. Bawa, I think maybe you've got an echo of some kind. I don't know whether the speaker's hearing it or something. Anyway, just a thought. I think the echo might be coming. I'm not sure from where, but anyway, there's a strong echo right now.
Okay. Can you all hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, yes.
Okay. And then my third question was really around kind of the budget approach for FY21. So I think Mr. Shields, the approach you laid out makes sense to me. I think given it's very serious, I think having to dial back a whole bunch of programs is probably the starting point for us. One thing I do want to emphasize that I mentioned last week is I do feel like local government has an obligation to just basic human needs. And so I like to get a sense of what our food assistance programs, the demand for those are, rental relief, any short-term kind of disaster funds that people are seeking, because I do feel like our vulnerable population is only going to grow. And while we may not be equipped to do as much as larger jurisdictions, I do want to make sure we are accounting for that in our budget. So it might cost us a little more money that we don't have, but I do want to make sure we are looking out for those people as well.
Thank you. I'm taking a note of that.
Okay.
All right.
That's it.
Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Thanks. Yeah, Ms. Hardy covered a number of things that I had questions on as well related to the surplus. One question that I did have we, or in any of these scenarios, contemplated drawing down on any of our reserves?
So before you answer, Mr. Shields, I would just remind everyone to put their lines on mute if they're not speaking. Anyway, my apologies, Mr. Shields.
So the question was on the use of reserves as part of closing the gap. And so when we go through the scenarios, that may need to be part of the discussion. I think our initial crack at this is going to try not to use reserves as part of balancing the budget, and to keep our powder dry if the situation deteriorates worse than what we forecast. So what we will come to you with on April 27th are reductions in operating costs to present a balanced budget. But we do anticipate that the use of reserves, ultimately might need to be part of the discussion.
Okay. Yeah, I certainly would not want to do that. But we do have reserves for catastrophic scenarios, and I would say we're pretty damn close to a catastrophic scenario in dealing with this. So not to draw down on it to where it violates any of our reserve and fund balance obligations as it relates to our AAA credit rating, but contemplating places that we need to address. I, for one, am not going to support putting any of this burden back on taxpayers. So we need to tighten our belts and figure out a way to make this happen. And to Ms. Hardy's comment about a surplus that was just expended, we need to do what we can to draw down on cash in areas that we still have available to us to close that gap. Because I think that this may be slightly worse than what we're projecting.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder?
Thank you. I think this is a fundamentally sound approach. I think for those of us who lived through the financial crisis, we understand how difficult this will be, and it will be critically important for us and all of our citizens to work together to lower expectations, to maintain the ability of the city to provide for core city services, because that's really what's at stake here. Thank you.
Mr. Z.
I just have one question. I happen to think that we're probably going to be talking about furloughs and part-time employment for to meet operational obligations as well as save money. And so my question is, for those that are on these kinds of statuses, would the employee receive health and pension benefits commensurate with being a full-time employee?
So, Mr. Z, I think I need to go through all of the scenarios before I could answer that question. Our approach right now will be to keep a hiring freeze in effect and not resort to furloughs or reduction in force. That's our strategy with the goalposts as we understand them today.
Well, if the goalposts move, I would ask that you consider that these employees have status with respect to health care and pension benefits. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other comments about this item?
Could I ask just one more question, Mr. Mayor?
Of course.
Just wondered, what are we planning, had things not happened the way they have, to borrow going forward? How much more borrowing do we have to do for projects that are on the books in the, I don't know, near term, 1 to 3 years?
Based on the CIP that was proposed earlier, we need to borrow for projects we're in the range of $1 million to $3 million for the next 2 to 3 years. However, if we need to address some of our operating funds that are going for capital and change the color of money, it will add some more burden on the borrowing. However, it will be within the 10 million limit for bank qualified loan. So we would not have to go for a general obligation loan. I mean debt.
So yeah, I should have been more specific. Do we have to go in to acquire money in the way that we to do the projects that are now in play? Understood you to say no.
I'm sorry, Mr. Duncan, I'm not sure. Was that a question directed at Ms. Bauer?
I think she answered. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, again, just to remind everyone to mute their speakers or microphone if you're not speaking. Okay, are there any other comments on this item? Madam Clerk, there's no public comment on this item, is there?
No.
All right. Madam, this is an item not for action. So I think that this discussion is complete. Are there other items relating to this emergency or the continuation of government that people would like to raise to Mr. Shields or in general before we adjourn?
I have one thing, Mayor.
Yes.
That was yes to Ms. Connolly.
Yes to Ms. Connolly.
I just want to alert everyone as well as staff and citizens that there is a fundraiser going on that was started by 2 members of our community. It's selling a Falls Church t-shirt. The funds raised will be used to purchase restaurant gift cards. And then the gift cards will be given to people who could use an opportunity to go out to eat. So they're working with the schools and with the City Health and Human Services to provide meals to families or individuals who don't have them. So those t-shirts are available for purchase, and it's on Twitter, and it's Better TOGFC so it's Better Together FC. And anybody can order a t-shirt. They're really good looking t-shirts and a very good cause, winning for our restaurants and for our residents.
Thank you, Ms. Connolly. Does anyone else have any further comments before we adjourn?
Not to keep the fun going, but there was some email traffic about meeting schedules. What's our thinking about meeting schedules going forward, and what about meetings for some of the other boards and commissions? Have we had any further thoughts on that?
So I think as far as this body goes, I think we will pick up a vigorous meeting schedule and continue on, meeting weekly in the manner we're doing so now, unless there's objection or other reason not to. But I think the business of government needs to continue, and there's plenty to be talking on and working on. So I think for the immediate future, it seems to me we ought to be meeting and continuing our schedule that we're doing right now. As to boards and commissions, I would let the city attorney weigh in. My understanding is that any of their meetings to be virtual would need, again, to go to the emergency and the continuation of government, but I'd let the city attorney speak directly to that.
That's correct. Those meetings would have to be either addressing the emergency or the continuity of government. We have, I believe the clerk has prepared a letter to go out to everyone and let them know we will not be scheduling their meetings unless they have contacted, I think the letter now says the city manager, and we have reviewed whether there is something that indeed meets the emergency criteria that they need to meet about. And if they do, then we will arrange for them to have a virtual emergency meeting, just like council is doing. But in the main, we're not aware of anything right now that they will have to do on an emergency basis.
I think also, just as an aside, that the state legislature is going to be looking at broadening the use of electronic meetings, in which case it may be, in the coming weeks, possible for these boards and commissions to get back in the business of government more fully. And so I think we all would agree that we certainly could use their support and their insights into what's going on at this time. But I think for the moment, we're governed by what the city attorney just said. So hopefully there will be some relief, I think, also for council as well, to broaden what we can do electronically. But to my knowledge, that has not occurred yet, but hopefully will in the near future.
That's correct. And we're keeping a close eye on that potential legislation.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Well, I'd like us to put a finger on the scale of that potential legislation to, as I've said before, give us, more latitude to discuss a kind of typical agenda of issues, because I'm hard put to find anything that doesn't in some way relate to the current crisis. I noticed that the county, Fairfax, when they meet, I think tomorrow, I'm sure the mayor probably knows about this because of the NVRC work, but they're having what they call a public hearing to consider the adoption of an uncodified ordinance to establish methods to assure continuity in Fairfax County government and conduct Board of Supervisors meetings during the emergency, and to repeal the emergency ordinance that was adopted March 24th. I have no idea what that means or relates to, but if they're having some of the same, issues of scope of meeting that we are, I'd just be interested in knowing how they and other bodies in the region are dealing with it. Okay, thanks.
Mayor, it's Dan Z. So if you're in tomorrow or wherever you are, Carol, if you're available, I would like to talk to you about the narrow scope definition of continuity of operations as it pertains to the library construction. To get together with Wyatt, I can speak with either one of you, but obviously I'm looking for a positive outcome that allows us to have a virtual meeting with all the people who have been nominated to serve on our board, so we can have a robust oversight committee presence. So I'm telling you what we're getting now is doesn't cut as far as I'm concerned. We know that Barco was clearing the trees off the site last week. So that's basically what we're getting. That is an incomplete progress report. Those are not the things that concern properly the site. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Other comments?
Mr. Mayor, Dave Snyder. As I've listened to the national debate, as well as now some governors have joined together to sketch out some sort of a recovery metrics, when it can begin and timing and things like that. My hope would be that we're a voice in that through various mechanisms, through our legislative committee, Mr. Mayor, through your work, that we're not simply a bystander, and that somehow in this debate it needs to be understood that the pandemic has created victims, but the instantaneous depression in the country has also created victims. And so how we need to move forward, hopefully the city can be an active player. Secondly, more domestically within the city, I wonder if we couldn't put together a committee or a series of task forces to help understand what it is that we need to do to bring about recovery as rapidly as possible when the conditions are right, with respect to our nonprofits, our business community, our government operations, our schools, et cetera. So I don't have a structure firmly in mind, whether it would be one council or several task forces with council member volunteers, if this is something the council wants to do, but there's going to have to be a lot of work done to bring us back to a normal, the old normal condition. Anyway, I just wanted to put that on the table for something we might discuss in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. As to your 2 points, taking them in reverse order, the idea of a task force or task forces and getting council individually involved in great detail, I think is a good idea, to use the power and the resources of this community and the knowledge and insight of city council. And I think there are a lot of areas that would benefit from that. It could be, interface with local businesses and local government. It could be with nonprofits, interaction with the faith community and nonprofits to make sure that no one's left behind in this pandemic. It can be to ensure we have adequate health resources. So I do like the idea of maybe organizing or structuring ourselves in a way that uses our diverse talents and skills on council. And so maybe Mr. Shields can give some thought as to how we and maybe others in the community can work together effectively to pull through this. And as to your first question, I can assure you, at least the things I'm involved in, that Falls Church is not a bystander with respect to federal and state resources and advocacy. Some of you, including myself, have been on a number of phone calls, conference calls, including calls with the governor, senators, and congressmen to try to advocate for small communities like Falls Church and the specific needs of this city. We are also represented on twice weekly calls with the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, which represents about 2.5 million of our fellow citizens in Northern Virginia, and I think together is a very strong advocate for this region and our community as well, and also a good source of sharing of information, coordinating communication and other efforts. So a lot is going on. I just want to assure the community there is quite a great deal that is going on behind the scenes, from the city manager's office to staff to individual council members. Are all involved with strongly advocating for the interest of this community. So I just want to make that clear to particularly those who are listening. I know the folks on this call, I think, are hopefully well aware of those efforts. But anyway, I just wanted to make that point. Are there other comments from other folks that should be made tonight?
Well, Mayor, let's adjourn.
All right, that sounds like a plan.
I'm sorry. I think Ms. Hardy had something to say, but she's having trouble unmuting.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, every time I unmute myself, it mutes again. So maybe it's giving me a hint. So I'll try to be quick. So wanted to echo the comment about boards and commissions. So to the extent that we can get them up and running again, I think council may have business that we want to refer out to them as it relates to the emergency. So I think flexibility to allow them to give us their advice would be really helpful. On that note, I brought up last week when we discussed the idea of microloans. And so I wonder whether the EDA would be interested in taking up that idea, especially since they have funds available. Hearing all the feedback from the businesses that the federal money just isn't coming in, or the process has just been really difficult. If we can be more nimble in offering some sort of revolving microloans out of the EDA funds, that could be something that, in my opinion, warrants the meeting under emergency guidelines that the EDA could help us with. So a request, I think, for the city manager and potentially Jim and Becky to consider whether the EDA would be interested in that. The third thing was related to the budget. We are, I guess, in what I thought was the NVTA grant cycle season. Do we know how the regional transportation funds might get impacted as it relates to our budget? And should we be doing any sort of advocating, or is everything kind of on hold and all the money kind of frozen?
So let me respond. So I know Cindy will. Yeah, we've been following up. We just got a summary of that today, which we can share with folks. There are some things up in the air, but it's basically a lot of the money that NVTA thought that it was going to get. In fact, it is going to get. But other things, other programs like the I-66 tolls may be maybe modified significantly by these events. So that data is being collected now, and we'd be sure to provide it. Let me make one other comment about microloans. The EDA's money, yes, but a lot of the EDA's money originally was tax money. And I would be very careful about the danger that loans actually become grants. So I think we need to be very careful about how this program is structured to assure that it does what it wants to do, and in fact, the money ends up being returned. That's my only thought on that. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Sorry, I had one last thing. A tactical thing, Mr. Shields, relating to the farmers market. So now that we've had it for 2 weeks, I want to check in on how it's going, because there's a NPR story I heard this afternoon that actually the U.S. meat supply actually might be strained. And so needing to go local for your meat, if you're not a vegetarian, may actually be more critical. And so we may see increased demand at the farmers market in the next week or two once the current supply is actually starting to peter out. It's more something that we should plan for in case we get crowds. That was it.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Are there other comments or questions before we adjourn?
I restate the motion to adjourn.
All right, let's do it. Thank you all for participating. Thank you to the public. Everybody hang tough. We're going to get through this together, but thank you all.
Thank you, Council.
All right.